This is our special interview. So, if you remember, we've been covering this story. Last week, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated in his home on the outskirts of the capital, Port-au-Prince, by heavily armed men. This was a story widely reported all around the world. So, we're talking about dozens of men reportedly storming his presidential compound to shoot and kill the president in his own home. So, of course, we've been hearing about some of those captured, but we want to find out more about this tragic incident. We have Professor Robert Fatton on with us. He is a professor in the Department of Politics at the University of Virginia, and he's the author of many books on Haitian politics, including The Guise of Exceptionalism, Unmasking the National Narratives of Haiti and the United States. Let's welcome him to the program. Hi, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yes. So let's talk about what happened last week. What exactly happened?
Well, no one really knows what exactly happened. There are several stories coming from Haiti and actually also coming from Colombia. What we do know is that 28 mercenaries supposedly attacked the private home of the president. And in the process, they assassinated the president and they injured his wife. His wife is out of danger. She is in a hospital in Miami, and she has apparently given a talk on a tweet. Now, many Haitians have disagreed with the tweet insofar as they don't think it's really the voice of the wife of the president, but the government has confirmed that this is her voice. Now, the story gets extremely complicated because in the 28 mercenaries, you had 26 were Colombians, 2 were Haitian Americans, and 3 had been killed by the police, 5 were arrested, and there are a few that are still on the loose. So what we have as a story is that this is a Colombian commando that stormed the house of the president. The problem is that it doesn't appear that there was any real security protecting the president because they walked in. There is no trace of security on the part of the Haitian groups that are supposed to protect the president. And once they would have killed the president, they would have left in pickup trucks, and actually the population has seen them in Pétionville, which is the neighborhood where the president lives, have seen those Colombians on their truck riding in the streets of that town. So this is a very peculiar assassination. And there has been also very conspiratorial arguments coming from Haiti. In particular, a senator from Haiti, a former senator, Stephen Benoit, has argued, and there is good grounds to follow part of that story, is that if you think about it, any type of commando who would be in the business of assassinating a president would have an exit strategy, especially if they came from Colombia, where you have a very well-trained army and where you have had fights against guerrillas and against drug dealers. So the question he asked, why is it that there was no exit strategy? The second question is raised by interviews that have been conducted by the Haitian police with the Haitian Americans who have been captured. The 2 Haitian Americans who have been captured have said to the police and to the judges in Haiti that there was no intention whatsoever to kill the president. They have argued that they went into his house to capture him and then go to the National Palace. And there, supposedly, he would have signed a document and another person would have assumed the presidency. The press in Haiti and the police in Haiti have very recently found out, apparently, that there is a Haitian American by the name of Christian Emmanuel Sanon, who would have been the person who would have been behind that whole operation and would have actually installed himself as president. So this is a very complicated, very bizarre history. And even the background of that man, that Dr. Sano, is
Yes.
very peculiar. Dr. Sano is apparently not a real doctor.
Okay.
Sorry?
Oh, no, go on. Yes, tell us about this supposed not real doctor.
Yes, well, that's Dr. Sano who has been arrested. And they say that is the intellectual mind behind the assassination. So Sano lived in the United States, in Florida. And apparently in 2013, he was completely bankrupt. And then he started moving from Haiti to Miami, Haiti. And what we've learned is that a few weeks ago, Dr. Sano apparently was in a private plane and came to Haiti. And they say that he's the one who had organized the whole affair, and that there are phone calls that were made between the mercenaries and Dr. Sano. That is a very peculiar story, as you can see, especially that Dr. Sano is not really known in Haiti. He is not known as a politician. He is not known as a leader who has a popular base. There is very little information except a YouTube segment where Dr. Sano said that the government was corrupt and that there was a need for change and that he wanted to lead the country. But that is a YouTube. From a YouTube to organize such a real commando and kill a president is a very strange phenomenon. So we have a story that has many questions that have yet to be answered. And some of the questions may never be known because some people argue that this was a whole conspiracy. Some people go even as far as saying that the Colombian mercenaries never killed the president, that they arrived after the president had been killed. And therefore, the people who killed the president were people in his own security. So go on figure. No one has come up with good answers. Neither the government nor the opposition have good answers. And the police is trying to put it together. The US has sent experts, Colombia has sent experts too. So perhaps we will get to the bottom of this story. But it is becoming increasingly bizarre.
Well, I want to know more about the assassinated president himself, Jovenel Moïse. To be honest, not well known right here in Korea. So can you tell us about him?
Well, Jovenel Moïse was a businessman selling and exporting bananas. And he became a political friend of the previous president, Michel Martelly. And when they organized the last elections, the president Martelly decided that his party would pick Jovenel Moïse as the candidate. Now, Jovenel Moïse was elected, but in very controversial elections. The rate of participation was extremely low, something like 15% of the electorate. And once Jovenel Moïse had been elected and taken power, he became very quickly illegitimate in the eyes of many Haitians. And things came to a head about 2 years ago when the government had an investigation, in particular the Senate, and they found an amazing amount of corruption about a deal that Venezuela and the United and Haiti had, a deal whereby Venezuela would give assistance to Haiti. And apparently, we are talking about $2 billion were never used properly. And some people in the Senate accused the president of that corruption. And then you had massive protests organized by civil society. And that was a new phenomenon in Haiti, because that civil society was comprised of students, of professionals, of peasants, of workers, of middle-class people. And it was a massive call for the resignation of Jovenel Moïse.
So, Professor,
and then we had
Right.
So,
I
go
have
ahead.
to interrupt you. Sorry, but um,
Mhm.
who takes power now? Now that he's been assassinated. Moise, he was a controversial leader, but who takes the reins now of Haiti?
That's another very complicated story because we have an acting prime minister who
Okay.
has said, and that's Claude Joseph. Then we have another prime minister who had been nominated by Jovenel Moïse before he was assassinated. And then we have a third party, a senator by the name of Lambert, who has asserted with the very few remnants of the Senate body that he was the legitimate president. So you have
Mm,
two prime ministers and you have a contender coming from the Senate. Now, there are added problems because the Constitution has been really violated. We don't have actually a parliament in function because we haven't had elections. And both the prime ministers, the one who's actually doing the job and the one who had been nominated,
mm-hmm.
were contested themselves. And Jovenel
Mm,
Moïse was himself contested because he was running the country by decree. And he had prolonged his mandate by a year. And constitutional experts in Haiti said that was very authoritarian, that he had no right to do it. But there's a complicated issue there I won't go into about the
right.
previous election.
So we only have about a minute left, Professor. We need to
Mhm.
wrap up. So what do you think is going to come of this investigation? It sounds very convoluted and very just all over the place in terms of different theories. The police have a lot of questions that need to be answered. Do you think we're going to get a concrete answer anytime soon as to who is really behind the assassination and why?
That's a very difficult question to answer. One would hope so. The government has committed itself to doing so. But the
Yes.
main question now facing Haiti is who is going to govern the country and whether we are headed to a significant crisis that may lead, unfortunately, to perhaps another foreign intervention in the country.
I see. Well, thank you so much for really explaining this very complicated situation to our listeners here in Korea. And thanks for joining us today, Professor.
Thank you so much.
This was Professor Robert Fatton, and we talked about the latest. There seems to be more questions and answers at this point as to who was really behind this assassination. As the professor mentioned, 28 mercenaries basically, converging onto the presidential compound. Who was behind it? I guess there are definitely a lot of question marks at this point.